Hello, good evening, and welcome back. Well, Matt Halfcock has some brilliant new news for us following on from Christmas Day, as 6 million more people do enter Tier 4 on Boxing Day. Until when? Well, of course, these things are supposed to be reviewed every 2 weeks, but good luck on them actually changing in that time period. And why might that be? Well, of course, there is the other strain of COVID, which is supposed to be 60 to 70% more infectious, but that is not final, as we don't know. That is just speculation. But we do have the South African variant, which is supposed to be similar to the UK's. However, it could be significantly more deadly. That is to say, instead of a death rate of less than 1%, speaking more about 15%, as in 1 in 7 of all ages. And I know that is quite a bombshell to drop, but then that would explain why there were doctors and police going to airports in order to try and quarantine people. But it does beg the question that if we are so concerned about mutations, and that there are thousands of them that have happened since the start of this outbreak, when China willingly let out this virus to the rest of the world, as in they closed domestic flights but allowed travel from Wuhan to the rest of the world, and then brought up the PPE from the rest of the world, and just paid off the World Health Organization in order to silence Taiwan's fears and warnings to the rest of the world, as in intentionally lied in order to fuck over the rest of the world so that they could get their own protective equipment, so that we would suffer, because they do not give a shit, and the CCP will instead happily sacrifice the entirety of the rest of the population in order to save China, and of course have no repercussions for it whatsoever. But we have had several thousand variants, and there is one out of South Africa that, as I say, could be having higher fatality rate. It does make you wonder as to why we did not close our borders so much earlier on, maybe like New Zealand did. That if you are concerned about this virus from the rest of the world, and you're aware that it mutates so rapidly, as they're saying that there have been thousands of variants, then of course surely one of the first things you would do is to close your borders. Oh, but that might be racist. Well, how about you fuck off? Because you cannot have it both ways. But maybe, of course, that would be telling, because then you'd be saying, hang on a minute, what, you're saying that you can't have a health service, a public health service, and open borders at the same time? Isn't that what Milton Friedman said? Well, we can't accept that, therefore we can't be closing our borders off because of a virus, otherwise people might realise that that is also true for the rest of ailments, and the people coming to the UK from abroad through open borders and then using our National Health Service isn't actually a way to run things economically or in any sensible way whatsoever. So, oh well, we can't be permitting that, can we? But instead, how about we just get all us indigenous Brits to suffer? That seems to be the sensible thing to do, and that's what Matt Halfcock has put forward. So 6 million more people in the east and southeast of England are to enter Tier 4 on Boxing Day, Health Secretary Matt Halfcock has announced. The place is moving into the highest level of restrictions, which include a stay-at-home order, border the areas already in Tier 4. A number of areas will also move up into Tiers 3 and 4. Just Tier 2. You bloody well wish. Freedoms. Can you remember them? Halfcock also revealed that another new coronavirus variant from South Africa has been detected in the UK. Yeah, as I say, and that one seems a bit more serious than the one in the UK at the moment. But, of course, do we know that for sure? No, because who are you getting the information from? And that is the worst thing about this whole debacle. Without a doubt. That you might say, well, healthcare shouldn't be political, but of course, everything's political. So then you say, well, yeah, sure, we should be able to help out everybody, but can we, pragmatically? No, we can't. It's the constrained vision, if you will. Understanding that we can't help out everybody because there aren't enough resources to go around, in which case, how do we divvy them out? And that is the long-standing debate. Okay, right, cool. So, healthcare has to be political. Right. Can we agree that it is worthwhile protecting the people that have a vote and decide on their nation? Like, one step removed, if you will. If we can agree on that, then in the instances of a global pandemic, then we shut our borders. If we can't agree on that, then we either say that we have a responsibility for the entire world, or just as ourselves, and we can decide if we wish to go further afield from that or not. At the moment, the idea is we have a responsibility to everybody in Britain, and anybody's welcome in Britain. And that doesn't tee up with either of the options available, as far as I can see. And yes, that is the line of which they're trying to straddle. Impossibly, of course. So it said anyone who had been there in the last 2 weeks of South Africa must quarantine immediately. On Wednesday, a further 40,000 people in the UK tested positive for the virus. Who cares? An all-time high. Who cares? Yeah, more testing. What a surprise. And there were 744 deaths within 28 days of positive test, according to government figures. Again, who cares? These death figures are very misleading, and you could even look at Sweden, for example, where the king is saying, well, we seem to have made a mistake here, we should have done something else. So, oh, right, cool. How many cases have you had? We've had so many deaths, however so many. It's been increasing recently. So, okay, cool. So, of the cases, how many people have recovered? You can go into it, you can have a look. And compared to the rest of the world, with like 30 million cases of people who have recovered, very good. In Sweden, you got 0. As in nobody. Nobody has recovered from the coup. And maybe I'm a bit cynical, pessimistic or skeptical, but that seems to suggest that would really bump up the figures. That if you're diagnosed with the coup, rightly or wrongly, and there's no possible way of you recovering from it, then that's going to bump up the figures. It really is. And when you've got something that mutates as quickly as this does so, then you either stamp it out by saying anybody who has it quarantines, cool, or you say, well, let's all get it quickly before it becomes more deadly, and then we're done. But for whatever reason, they chose neither of these, because quite evidently the lockdowns do not work. The idea was to flatten the curve, not to eradicate the virus, which just doesn't make sense. It's as if they're thinking, oh, right, so this virus is going to be the same forevermore. But of course we know that it isn't. It is going to mutate. That is how evolution works. So if they're hoping that it is going to mutate to something less deadly but more infectious, as viruses tend to do, then fair enough. But of course that isn't what they said at the time. It was just, let's lessen the strain on the NHS. Well, yes, we could have done with that a few decades ago. Really, it's been overwhelmed pretty much since its inception, and mass migration has only made things worse with health tourism and the like, and then the need to hire interpreters. So you've really got to make a decision, and they seem to be trying to come to terms with one, which really isn't possible. As I say, it aligns with their idea of we're going to have lockdowns, but we're also going to have open borders, or at least a lack of travel restrictions from other countries. So, well, that just isn't good enough, put simply. It really isn't. If it's a serious virus, then you're going to be taking things seriously. Something like MERS, for example, which has about a 30% death rate, and that is very serious. Or if it's not serious, then we don't need to bother with any of this at all. But trying to straddle that middle ground seems utterly stupid, in my estimation, and yet that is the one that they wish to be going for. If it is a serious problem, then of course you quarantine the sick, and only the sick, until they recover or they die and the virus is done. And you shut your borders, you keep yourselves isolated until it passes. that you do it on a national level. However, of course, that is not what they have decided to do. Where is the sense, Mr. Halfcock? Where is the fucking sense? But in that case, if you're saying flatten the curve of the NHS, then you're saying that you understand it is going to mutate and it is going to become less deadly. Or, of course, the idea is to wait for a vaccine. However, it mutates at the same rate, in which case the vaccine that they're bringing out now is not going to be effective for the new strains in the UK or South Africa, or both, of course. In which case you're hoping that it's going to be easy enough to change, but then, of course, the coof is going to become endemic, which is to say it's going to become seasonal, just like the flu, and you're going to have annual top-ups of your vaccination. And with something that, at present, doesn't seem to be all too deadly or too much of a concern, it seems to be much ado about nothing, as of course we've said many times before, but will continue to do so. So it's not just that it's become political, but it seems to be a core sticking point, and it's just the opaqueness of it all is what makes it so incredibly difficult, that in order to find out about these things, you have to do your own research. You cannot just accept things on face value or trust. And that really is the most painful bit, because let's say the one out of South Africa really is deadly, 15%, or, maybe even getting closer to MERS, and is a real nightmare. The government and the media might publish that and say, hey, a seventh or a third of you are going to die if you catch this, regardless of age group, but who's actually going to believe it? Anybody who's skeptical isn't going to believe it. And hopefully they're going to do their own research and find the same conclusion, but there's a chance that they will not do their own research, because they'll just be presuming whatever the media or the government says, the opposite is true, which up until now does seem to be actually a rather accurate way to do things. And that is the biggest problem, in my estimation, that there doesn't seem to be anybody at all that is trustworthy. And the idea of the government helping you out, or the journalists actually doing journalism, is a fool's errand, and instead you have to do that journalism and research for yourself. And in some instances, of course, you have to kind of be akin to an A-level in science, chemistry, or maybe actually have a degree or master's or even doctorate in order to understand and comprehend the dense language of what they're mentioning, which then I think was very similar to the Crusades in the Middle Ages, where the Bible would just be written in Latin, and the congregation would not be able to understand it, so the priest would conveniently translate it in order to push a narrative, like creating purgatory, for example, which isn't mentioned at all in the Bible. That if you go do what the priests say, they will pray for you, and then you'll get into heaven, in case you haven't had a good enough life. That it was just to push their own agenda because people couldn't understand it. That seems to be the same, but using scientific language instead of Latin. Then again, quite a lot of scientific language is still Latin. So good luck doing your own journalism when it's so dense and just unreachable that you can't actually understand what is going on, because it is designed so that you cannot read it. That is the whole point of it. So of course we can't trust the media, given that from what we've seen, we can expose their lies time and time and time and time and time and time and time again. And the same goes for the government. Of course, that they will lie in order to push their own agenda, in order to create a need for themselves, which there wasn't before, and there wouldn't be if they were just honest in the first place. But they have to pretend that they're important and that you need them, so that you don't come to the conclusion, the reality conclusion, that you can get by without them. But that's it for me for now, so let me know what you guys think down below. If you think, well, hey, I think I'm kind of undermining their message and I'm doing a disservice, and people should actually believe what the government says all the time, and believe what mainstream media says all the time, and abide by these rules without any question, because what they're saying is definitively true. They've done their research, they have their own experts, they agree, and we should trust what they say blindly, because is not enough time in the day to do our own research, and therefore we might as well believe them, and they wouldn't lie to us anyway. That's not what government does to its own populace. Or if you think, fuck no, No. They've blown any and all credibility that they have had. We cannot believe them at face value anymore. If they're trying to restrict our lives and our livelihoods, and we don't have the time to research it, then we're just going to believe that they're lying, because that's what they seem to have done before, and we will not take this lying down. Either way, let me know down below. Always intrigued to hear what you guys have to say. And as always, until next time, have a good one.